The training facility sat on the surface of Tau 7, a small moon orbiting a gas giant in the Kepler system. From the observation deck, Jake Morrison could see the rings of the massive planet stretching across the sky like a painting. It was beautiful, but he was not here for sightseeing. He was here to prove something. Jake had arrived at the Intergalactic Survival Training Institute 3 weeks ago. The building itself was impressive, a mix of human engineering and alien architecture. Curved walls made from some kind of clear metal rose up from the gray rock of the moon. Inside, students from 12 different species walked the hallways, attended classes, and trained for the hardest test in the galaxy. The humans stood in the cafeteria, holding a tray of food that looked nothing like the meals from Earth. The protein bar was blue and tasted like metal. The drink was thick and warm, but Jake ate it without complaining. He had eaten worse during his years as a wilderness guide back home. "You actually like that stuff?" a voice asked behind him. Jake turned to see Amy Rodriguez, another human and one of the few friendly faces in this place. She was a military officer, sent here by Earth's Defense Force to learn alien survival techniques. Her dark hair was pulled back tight and she wore the standard gray training uniform. "It's food," Jake said with a shrug. "I've eaten bugs in the Amazon and raw fish in Alaska. This is fine." Amy sat down across from him and laughed. "You're weird, Morrison. You know that?" "So I've been told." They ate in silence for a moment. Around them, other students talked in various languages. Some spoke in clicks and whistles. Others used translators that hung from their necks. The galaxy was huge, and every species had their own way of communicating. "How are your classes going?" Amy asked. Jake thought about the past 3 weeks. The classroom training had been interesting but frustrating. The instructors taught survival methods based on strict rules and databases. Everything was about following protocols and trusting the information that had been collected over hundreds of years. "It's different from what I'm used to," Jake admitted. "Back on Earth, survival training is about adapting. You look at what's around you and figure it out. Here they want you to memorize lists and follow exact procedures." "That's because it works," Amy said. "These people have been exploring dangerous planets for centuries. They know what they're doing." "Maybe," Jake said, but he did not sound convinced. The main instructor for their advanced course was a being named Velthar. He was a Zethian, a species that looked like tall gray lizards with forearms and large black eyes. Velthar had been teaching survival for 40 years and had a reputation across the galaxy. Students either loved him or feared him. Sometimes both. Jake had already clashed with the instructor several times. It was never hostile, but there was a clear difference in how they saw survival. Velthar believed in the database, in proven methods, in doing things the right way. Jake believed in looking at each situation as unique and finding creative solutions. That afternoon, Jake sat in Velthar's classroom with 20 other students. The room was cold and filled with display screens showing images of different planets. Some looked almost normal, with blue skies and green plants. Others looked like nightmares with acid rain and volcanic eruptions. Velthar stood at the front of the room, his forearms moving as he spoke. His voice came through the translator as calm and measured. "Survival in extreme environments requires discipline," the instructor said. "It requires trust in accumulated knowledge. Over 200 years, we have cataloged thousands of worlds. We know what is edible and what is poison. We know which planets can support life and which cannot. This information saves lives." Jake raised his hand. "It was not the first time." "Yes, Human Morrison," Velthar said with what might have been a sigh. "What about planets that haven't been fully explored?" Jake asked. "The database can't know everything about every world." "The database knows enough," Velthar replied. "That is the point. We do not expect you to discover new things. We expect you to survive using proven methods. Innovation is dangerous. Following protocol keeps you alive." Jake wanted to argue but knew it would not help. He had learned that Velthar was not interested in debates. The instructor had seen too many students die because they tried to be clever instead of careful. After class, a student approached Jake. It was Creason, a Veldran who looked like a blue-furred wolf walking on 2 legs. The Veldrans were curious by nature and loved asking questions. "You disagree with Instructor Velthar often," Creason said, his translator making his voice sound friendly. "I don't disagree with him," Jake said. "I just think there's more than one way to survive." "Your species is new to galactic community, yes? Only 15 years since first contact?" "That's right. But humans have reputation already." "You are called unpredictable. dangerous to yourselves. Is this true? Jake smiled. We're survivors. Earth is a tough planet. We had to learn to adapt or die. Maybe that makes us seem reckless to species that have had it easier. Creason's ears twitched in what might have been amusement. Earth is classified as Class 8 Death World in database. Very high difficulty. Most species could not evolve there naturally. We didn't have a choice, Jake said. It was adapt or go extinct. So we learned to eat things that were poisonous. We learned to live in deserts and frozen wastelands. We learned to make tools and fire and medicine from whatever we could find. That's just what humans do. The Veldran seemed fascinated by this. Perhaps that is why you questioned the instructor. You expect to adapt instead of follow. Maybe, Jake admitted. The weeks continued and the training became more intense. Students learned how to use environmental suits, how to purify water, how to signal for rescue, and how to ration food supplies. Everything was methodical and precise. There were right ways and wrong ways to do things with no room for creativity. Jake learned it all, but he also paid attention to things the instructors did not talk about. He studied the plants shown in the database images. He looked at the soil types and weather patterns. He asked questions about local wildlife and ecosystem behaviors. Most instructors found his questions strange and irrelevant. Why do you need to know about the plants? One teacher asked him. The database tells you if they are edible or not. That is all you need. I'm just curious, Jake said, which was true but not the whole truth. The real truth was that Jake did not fully trust the database, not because it was wrong, but because it was limited. A computer could scan a plant and say it was toxic, but humans had learned long ago that toxic did not always mean inedible. It just meant you needed to know how to process it correctly. Finally, after 6 weeks of classroom training, Velthar made an announcement that changed everything. You will now face your final examination, the instructor said. Each of you will be sent alone to a Class 9 death world for 72 hours. You will have standard equipment and emergency rations. Your goal is simple. Survive and signal for extraction when the time is complete. The room went silent. A Class 9 death world was one step below impossible. These were planets where almost nothing could live naturally. The air was often toxic, the temperature extreme, and the environment hostile in every way. The planet you will visit is called Karmesh 4, Velthar continued. It has been thoroughly studied. I want to be very clear about something important. The instructor's forearms spread wide, and he looked directly at each student. There is nothing edible on Karmesh 4. Nothing. The database has confirmed this over 2 centuries of study. No plants, no animals, no fungi, nothing can be safely consumed by any known species. Your survival depends entirely on rationing your emergency supplies and maintaining your equipment. Do not waste time looking for food that does not exist. Do you understand? Students nodded around the room. Jake nodded too, but his mind was already racing. That evening, Amy found Jake in the observation deck staring out at the stars. You're going to do something stupid, aren't you? She asked. What makes you say that? I know that look. You think you can find food on a planet where the database says there's nothing? Jake turned to face her. The database has been wrong before. Not about something this important, Amy said. Jake, 73% of students fail this test. Some of them die. Please don't take unnecessary risks. I won't, Jake promised. But I'm also not going to assume the database knows everything. Humans survived for thousands of years before we had databases. We did it by being observant and willing to try things. Just be careful, Amy said softly. The next morning, students began their individual deployments. They would go one at a time over the next few days. Jake was scheduled for the following afternoon, which gave him time to prepare. He checked his equipment carefully. The environmental suit would protect him from the toxic atmosphere. The breather mask would filter the air. The emergency ration pack contained enough food bars and water for 3 days if he was careful. The water recycler could turn moisture from the air into drinking water. The emergency beacon would call for rescue if needed. Everything was standard issue and well made. But Jake also packed some items that were not standard. A small knife from Earth, a metal cup that could be used for boiling water, a length of cord that had 100 uses. These were personal items and the instructors allowed them. The shuttle dropped through the orange clouds of Karmesh 4, and Jake felt his stomach lurch with the turbulence. Through the window, he watched as the planet's surface came into view. It looked exactly like the images from the database, but worse. The sky was a sickly orange color, and the ground below was covered in purple-gray vegetation that looked more dead than alive. Ben brought the shuttle down in a rocky canyon area. The landing was rough, and the whole craft shook as it touched the ground. Jake grabbed his pack and stood up, checking his environmental suit one more time. The suit covered him from head to toe with a clear helmet that let him see clearly. The breather mask attached to his face would filter the toxic atmosphere and provide oxygen. "This is it," Ben said. "I'll be back in exactly 72 hours. Don't miss the pickup." "I won't," Jake said. "And Morrison? Good luck." Jake nodded and stepped out of the shuttle. The moment his boots hit the ground, he felt the difference. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth, making him feel almost bouncy. The air outside his suit was visible through the helmet, a thin orange haze that would kill him in minutes without protection. The shuttle lifted off behind him, and then he was alone. Jake stood still for a moment, letting his senses adjust. The canyon around him was maybe 100 meters wide, with steep rocky walls on both sides. The ground was covered in loose stones and patches of the strange purple vegetation. In the distance, he could see steam rising from vents in the ground, signs of geothermal activity. Most students would immediately find shelter and set up a base camp. They would check their supplies, test their equipment, and begin the strict rationing that would keep them alive for 3 days. That was the protocol. That was what Velthar had taught them. Jake did something different. He started walking, his eyes scanning everything around him. He was not looking for shelter yet. He was looking for information. Back on Earth, the first rule of wilderness survival was to understand your environment. You could not survive in a place you did not understand. The purple vegetation was his first target. As he walked, he saw that it was not just one type of plant. There were at least 5 different varieties, each with slightly different shapes and textures. Some had thick stems and broad leaves. Others were thin and wispy like grass. A few had bulbous growths that might have been seeds or fruit. Jake knelt down and examined one of the plants closely. His suit had a basic scanner built into the glove, designed to detect immediate dangers like acid or extreme toxins. He ran the scanner over the plant and watched the readout. Toxic compounds detected. Not suitable for consumption. That was what the scanner said. That was what the database said. But Jake had learned not to trust simple answers. On Earth, many plants were toxic in their raw form, but became safe after processing. Cassava root could kill you if eaten raw, but boiling it removed the poison. Acorns were bitter and inedible until you leached them in water. Mushrooms needed cooking to be safe. Jake carefully pulled off one of the leaves and sealed it in a sample bag. He would test it later. He continued his exploration, moving slowly through the canyon. The ground was uneven, with rocks of different sizes scattered everywhere. Some areas had loose sand that shifted under his feet. Other areas had patches of what looked like moss, though it was darker and tougher than any moss from Earth. After an hour of walking, Jake found something interesting. Near one of the steam vents, where the ground was warmer, there was a different type of growth. It looked like fungi, with flat caps and thick stems growing in clusters. The scanner said they were toxic too, but Jake took samples anyway. He also noticed movement. Small creatures scurried between the rocks, too fast for him to get a good look at first. But after patient observation, he managed to see one clearly. It looked like a cross between a crab and a spider, with 6 legs and a hard shell. It was maybe the size of his hand. The database had mentioned these creatures. They were classified as non-nutritive, meaning they had no food value. But Jake knew that classification often meant nobody had bothered to try eating them properly. On Earth, people ate crabs and lobsters and insects. Why not these things? He set up a simple trap using his cord and some rocks. It was basic but effective. Within 30 minutes, he had caught 3 of the creatures. They clicked and waved their legs, but they could not escape. Jake put them in a container and continued exploring. By the end of the first 6 hours, Jake had collected samples of 17 different things. Plants, fungi, insects, soil from different areas, water condensation from the steam vents, and what looked like algae growing in small pools of acidic liquid. Most of it was probably poisonous. Most of it would probably make him sick or kill him if he ate it raw. But Jake was not planning to eat anything raw. He found a good spot to set up camp, a sheltered area between 2 large rocks that blocked the wind. The geothermal vents nearby would provide heat. He unpacked his supplies and organized everything carefully. Then he started the real work. Jake built a small fire using heat from a nearby vent and some dry plant material. The flames were pale blue instead of orange, but they were hot enough for his purposes. He filled his metal cup with water from his supplies and placed it over the fire to boil. The first test was simple. He took a small piece of one plant leaf and dropped it into the boiling water. If the toxins were water-soluble, they might cook out. After 10 minutes, he removed the leaf and let it cool. Then he touched it to his lips. Nothing happened. No burning, no numbness, no immediate reaction. He waited 10 more minutes. Still nothing. This was a good sign, but not proof. He would need to do more tests. Jake had learned this process years ago from a survival instructor in the Amazon. It was called the Universal Edibility Test, and it had saved his life more than once. The key was patience and careful observation. You never just ate something unknown. You tested it in stages: skin contact, lip contact, tongue contact, small taste, small amount swallowed, larger amount. He spent the next several hours testing different samples. The boiled leaf from the first plant seemed safe at the lip contact stage. A root he had dug up from the less acidic soil showed promise after roasting. The fungi near the vent released a pleasant smell when heated. Not everything was promising. Some plants released toxic fumes when heated. Others turned into black sludge that was clearly inedible. The algae from the acid pools was too corrosive even after boiling. But Jake expected that. Not everything would be edible. The goal was to find what could work. As night fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. Jake was glad for his environmental suit, which regulated his body temperature. He ate one of his ration bars for dinner and drank some recycled water. He was not taking chances yet. All his testing needed to be verified before he actually consumed anything from the planet. But he was excited. In just 6 hours, he had found 3 things that showed real promise. That was 3 more than the database said existed. The second day began with more exploration and testing. Jake expanded his search area, moving beyond the immediate canyon to nearby slopes and valleys. He found more varieties of the purple vegetation, each one slightly different. He found underground tubers that looked like potatoes but were harder and darker. He found more types of fungi, some growing on rocks and others growing on the dead vegetation. He also caught more of the crab-like creatures. They were easy to trap once you understood their behavior. They moved toward heat sources, probably looking for the small bacteria or whatever they ate near the vents. Jake used this to his advantage, setting traps near warm spots. The cooking experiments continued. Jake roasted, boiled, smoked, and even tried fermenting some samples. He learned that the root vegetables became much less acidic after long roasting. The fungi lost most of their toxicity when dried over gentle heat. The crab creatures, when cracked open and cooked, had meat that looked surprisingly normal. By midday of the second day, Jake was ready for the real test. He selected the item that seemed safest, a piece of roasted root that had passed every preliminary test. He cut a tiny piece smaller than a grain of rice and placed it on his tongue. The taste was strange, earthy, and slightly bitter, but not unpleasant. Jake waited 15 minutes, monitoring himself for any reaction. His stomach felt fine. His mouth was not burning. His vision was clear. He swallowed the tiny piece and waited 2 hours. Nothing bad happened. Jake smiled inside his helmet. It worked. The root was edible. Over the next 24 hours, he repeated this process with multiple items. The fungi could be eaten after proper drying and cooking. The crab creatures were definitely edible and actually tasted good, similar to shrimp. Some of the leaves, when boiled multiple times with fresh water each time, lost their toxicity and became something like tough spinach. Jake also discovered that different preparation methods created different foods. The crab creatures could be roasted, boiled, or smoked. Each method produced a different flavor and texture. The fungi could be ground into powder and mixed with water to create something like bread. The roots could be sliced thin and dried to make chips. By the third day, Jake was not just surviving. He was thriving. He had stopped eating his ration bars entirely, saving them as emergency backup. Instead, he ate meals made from the planet's resources. Roasted. Ben Carter stood at the entrance of the shuttle, completely frozen. His mouth hung open as he stared at Jake's camp. The pilot had extracted dozens of students from Carmesh 4 over the years, and they all looked the same when he picked them up. Tired, hungry, and relieved to be leaving. They had empty ration packs and were counting the hours until they could eat real food again. Jake Morrison looked nothing like that. He stood in front of what could only be described as an outdoor kitchen. There were organized piles of different materials: a drying rack with items hanging from it, multiple fire areas, and containers filled with processed foods. Jake himself looked energetic and well-fed, not at all like someone who had just survived 3 days on a death world. "I don't understand," Ben said slowly. "What is all this?" "Food," Jake said simply. "From the planet. I found 47 different edible items. Well, 47 different food options, some are the same ingredients prepared different ways, but still." "That's impossible," Ben said. "The database says there's nothing edible here. Nothing. I've been flying extraction runs to this planet for 2 years, and every instructor says the same thing." Jake picked up his metal cup, which had some kind of dark liquid in it. "Want to try some tea? It's made from dried lichen. Tastes bitter, but it grows on you." Ben shook his head. "Jake, I need to call this in. Like right now. This is major." "Sure," Jake said. "But can you help me pack some samples first? I want to bring evidence back to the academy." The pilot pulled out his communication device and spoke quickly into it. "Control, this is Shuttle 7. I have Morrison at the extraction point, but there's a situation. You need to get Instructor Velthar out here immediately, and maybe Commander Hayes too." The voice on the other end asked something. "No, he's fine," Ben said. "More than fine. Just trust me, you need to see this." Within an hour, another shuttle arrived. This one was larger and carried several people. Velthar emerged first, his forearms moving with irritation. The instructor clearly thought this was a waste of time. Behind him came Commander Hayes, the human military officer, who oversaw all Earth personnel at the academy. Amy Rodriguez climbed out last, her face full of curiosity and concern. Velthar approached Jake's camp, his large black eyes scanning everything. The instructor said nothing at first, just walked slowly around the area, looking at each element. He examined the drying rack, the cooking areas, the organized containers. His translator was silent, but Jake could tell the Zythian was disturbed. "Explain this," Velthar finally said, his voice cold through the translator. "Yes, sir," Jake said respectfully. "I completed the survival test using primarily resources from the planet, rather than my emergency rations. Over the course of 72 hours, I identified, processed, and tested 47 different edible food sources." "Impossible," Velthar said flatly. "The database has been compiled over 2 centuries. Every biological sample on Karmesh 4 has been analyzed. There is nothing edible here. You must have brought extra rations and are creating an elaborate deception." Jake had expected this reaction. He pulled out his documentation, a handwritten journal where he had recorded everything. "Sir, I kept detailed notes. Every food source is documented with location, processing method, and test results. I also have samples of each item, both raw and processed. You can scan them yourself." Commander Hayes stepped forward. She was a short woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Morrison, are you telling me you actually ate things from this planet?" "Yes, ma'am. After extensive testing, of course. I used standard human edibility testing protocols, the same ones we've used on Earth for thousands of years." Amy looked like she did not know whether to laugh or yell at him. "Jake, you could have died." "But I didn't," Jake said, "because I was careful. I tested everything in stages. I used proper processing techniques. This wasn't reckless, Amy. This was methodical." Velthar pulled out a scanner from his equipment belt. It was larger and more sophisticated than the basic scanner in Jake's suit. The instructor began examining the items in Jake's camp, starting with the drying rack. He scanned something that looked like dried meat. "This is the arthropod species native to this region," Velthar said. "They are classified as non-nutritive. The database specifically states they cannot be consumed safely." "The database scanned them raw," Jake explained. "But I cooked them. Heat breaks down the compounds that make them dangerous. It's the same principle humans use with shellfish on Earth. Raw lobster can make you sick, but cooked lobster is delicious." Velthar moved to the next item, scanning a pile of roots. "These are toxic. Highly acidic. When raw, yes," Jake agreed. "But roasting them for several hours converts the acid into something harmless. Humans learned this technique with cassava root thousands of years ago. Cassava is deadly if eaten raw, but it's a staple food for billions of people after proper processing." The instructor continued scanning, moving from item to item. Each time his scanner confirmed that the base materials were what the database said they were: toxic, inedible, dangerous. But each time Jake explained the processing method that made them safe. Commander Hayes picked up Jake's journal and started reading. Her eyebrows rose higher with each page. This is incredibly detailed. You documented every single step? Yes, ma'am. Times, temperatures, processing methods, test results, everything. I wanted to make sure I could replicate the results and teach others if necessary. Creason, the Veldran student, had arrived with the second shuttle. He approached the camp cautiously, his blue fur bristling with excitement. Is it true? You found food where none existed? Food existed, Jake corrected. It just needed processing. Everything in nature has potential. You just have to know how to unlock it. Velthar stood very still, his forearms hanging at his sides. For a long moment, the instructor said nothing. Then he spoke, his voice quiet. I need to run comprehensive tests. I cannot accept this based on observation alone. We will take samples back to the Academy laboratory. Of course, sir, Jake said. I expected that. If your claims are verified, Velthar continued, then we must reassess the database. And my teaching methods, and many other things. The instructor sounded shaken, like his entire worldview was crumbling. Jake felt sympathy for the alien. Sir, your methods aren't wrong. They keep students alive, and that's the most important thing. But maybe there's room for both approaches. Safety protocols and adaptive innovation working together. Perhaps, Velthar said, but he did not sound convinced. Commander Hayes made a decision. We're taking everything back to the Academy. Morrison, you'll present your findings to the full faculty. If this holds up under scrutiny, this could change everything we know about survival training. They spent the next 2 hours carefully packing samples of every food source Jake had found. He showed them how to identify each type of plant, where to find the arthropods, and how to process everything safely. Ben and Amy helped with the packing while Velthar continued scanning and recording data. Creason was fascinated by one particular item, the lichen tea. This smells terrible, the Veldran said, sniffing the dried material. But you drank it? It tastes better than it smells, Jake said with a laugh. Not great, but it has minerals and keeps you hydrated. On Earth, we have many drinks that people consider acquired tastes. Coffee, for example. First time you drink it, it's bitter and awful, but you learn to like it. Humans are strange, Creason observed. We get that a lot, Amy said. The flight back to Tau 7 was tense. Velthar sat alone, reviewing his scans and comparing them to the database. Commander Hayes was already composing reports on her datapad. Amy sat next to Jake and spoke quietly. Do you understand what you've done? She asked. I survived a test, Jake said. No, you've challenged 200 years of accumulated knowledge. You've made the best survival instructor in the galaxy question everything he knows. This is going to cause waves, Jake. Big ones. I didn't mean to cause trouble, Jake said honestly. I just wanted to see if the database was complete. Turns out it wasn't. And that's exactly the problem, Amy said. If the database was wrong about Karmesh 4, what else is it wrong about? How many other planets have been marked as barren when they actually have resources? Jake had not thought about that. He had been focused on his own survival test, not the larger implications. But Amy was right. If one planet had been misclassified, there could be dozens or hundreds of others. When they arrived back at the Academy, word had already spread. Students and instructors crowded the landing bay, all wanting to see the human who had supposedly found food on a foodless planet. The crowd parted as Velthar led the group toward the laboratory complex. The testing took 6 hours. Teams of xenobiologists, chemists, and nutrition experts examined every sample Jake had brought back. They ran spectral analysis, chemical breakdowns, and toxicity screenings. They tested the processed foods against the raw materials to see how the preparation methods had changed the molecular structure. Jake sat in an observation room with Amy and Commander Hayes, watching through a glass wall as the scientists worked. Creason had been allowed to observe as well, and the Veldran could not stop asking questions. How did you know boiling would remove toxins? Creason asked. The news about Karmesh 4 spread through the Academy like wildfire. Within days, everyone knew about the human who had found 47 food sources on a planet that supposedly had none. Students whispered about it in hallways. Instructors debated it in faculty meetings. Even species who had never heard of humans before started asking questions. Jake found himself at the center of attention he did not want. Everywhere he went, people stared at him. Some looked impressed. Others looked skeptical. A few looked angry. as if he had personally insulted them by proving the database wrong. "This is exhausting," Jake said to Amy one evening in the cafeteria. They sat in a quiet corner trying to avoid the constant stares. "You're famous now," Amy said. "The human who challenged galactic knowledge and won. That's a big deal." "I didn't challenge anything," Jake protested. "I just wanted to pass my survival test." "But that's exactly what makes it powerful," Amy said. "You weren't trying to prove anyone wrong. You were just doing what humans do naturally. That scares some people and excites others." 3 days after returning from Karmesh 4, Jake was called to a meeting with the Academy's Leadership Council. The council consisted of representatives from all major species in the galactic community. They made decisions about curriculum, standards, and policies. Jake walked into the council chamber feeling nervous. It was a large circular room with seats arranged in tiers like an ancient amphitheater. Beings from a dozen different species sat looking down at him. Commander Hayes stood beside him as his advocate. The council leader was a Scythian elder named Tarkhan, even older than Velthar. The elder spoke through a translator in a voice that sounded ancient and tired. "Human Morrison, you have created significant controversy with your actions on Karmesh 4. Some members of this council believe you violated testing protocols. Others believe you demonstrated valuable skills. We must determine the truth." "I'm happy to answer any questions, sir," Jake said. For the next 2 hours, the council questioned him about everything. They wanted to know exactly what he had done and when. They asked about his testing methods, his documentation, his reasoning for each decision. Some questions were friendly and curious. Others were hostile and accusatory. One council member, a being from a species called the Drakim, who looked like walking crystals, was particularly aggressive. "You put yourself at extreme risk," the Drakim said. "You could have died from poisoning. You violated the fundamental principle of the survival test. Follow established protocols." "With respect, council member, I did follow protocols," Jake said. "Just not the ones taught here. I followed human edibility testing protocols that have been proven over thousands of years. I was careful and methodical. But those protocols are not approved by this academy," the Drakim argued. "Then perhaps they should be," Commander Hayes interjected. "Human survival techniques have kept our species alive on a death world for hundreds of thousands of years. That experience has value." Another council member spoke, this one a friendly-looking being with purple skin. "The question is not whether human methods are valid. The question is whether we should incorporate them into our training, and whether we need to review our planetary classifications," added another member. The debate continued. Jake stood silently while beings argued about him, about humans, about the database, and about the future of survival training. Some wanted to dismiss his achievement as a dangerous anomaly. Others wanted to completely overhaul the training program. Finally, Velthar stood up. The instructor had been sitting quietly until now. When he spoke, everyone listened. "I have taught survival for 40 years, Velthar said. "I have trained thousands of students. I have always believed that following the database and established protocols was the only safe path. Human Morrison has challenged that belief, and I have spent the past 3 days examining my assumptions." The chamber was silent. "I was wrong," Velthar continued. "Not about safety being important, not about protocols having value, but about believing that our knowledge was complete. The database is a tool, not a sacred text. It can be improved. And perhaps we need perspectives from species like humans, who learn survival through necessity rather than technology." The Zethian sat down, and the chamber erupted in discussion. Tarkhan raised a hand for silence. "We will deliberate and announce our decision tomorrow. Human Morrison, you are dismissed." Jake and Commander Hayes left the chamber together. As they walked through the corridors, the commander spoke quietly. "That went better than I expected," she said. "Velthar's support will carry weight." "What do you think they'll decide?" Jake asked. "Hard to say. But whatever happens, you've already made an impact. People are questioning assumptions they've held for centuries. That's not a small thing." That night, Jake could not sleep. He lay in his quarters staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. He had come to the academy to learn and to prove that humans could survive alongside other species. He had not planned to start a revolution in survival training. The next morning, the council's decision was announced via the academy's communication system. All students and faculty were required to attend an assembly in the main auditorium. Jake stood with the other humans, feeling nervous. Amy stood beside him and she reached over to squeeze his hand briefly. "Whatever happens, you did good," she whispered. Tarkan stood at the podium, his old voice amplified through the room's speakers. "After careful deliberation, the Council has reached several decisions regarding the events on Karmesh 4 and their implications for this academy." The room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. "First, we acknowledge that Human Morrison's actions, while unconventional, were conducted with appropriate caution and documentation. He will pass his survival test with honors. However, future students are reminded that all testing methods must be cleared with instructors before deployment." Jake felt relief wash through him. He had passed. "Second, the Council recognizes that our database, while extensive, may have limitations in analyzing potential food sources that require processing. We will establish a research team to review classifications of planets currently marked as barren. This team will include human consultants." Murmurs spread through the auditorium. This was bigger than just Jake's test. "Third, the Academy will incorporate adaptive survival training into our advanced curriculum. Instructor Velthar will lead this program, with assistance from qualified human instructors. Students will learn both traditional protocols and innovative problem-solving techniques." Velthar stood and bowed slightly, accepting this new responsibility. "Finally, we acknowledge that the galactic community benefits from diversity of thought and experience. Each species brings unique strengths. We must learn to value these differences rather than insisting on uniform approaches." Tarkan paused, looking directly at Jake. "Human Morrison, your actions have reminded us of an important truth. The universe is vast and full of possibilities we have not yet imagined. We thank you for this lesson." The auditorium erupted in applause. Not everyone was clapping. Some beings still looked skeptical or angry, but the majority seemed pleased with the decision. Over the following weeks, Jake's life changed dramatically. He was approached by the research team studying planetary classifications. They wanted his input on which planets might have been misclassified. He spent hours reviewing database entries, suggesting which worlds might benefit from human-style analysis. Velthar asked Jake to help develop the new adaptive survival curriculum. The two of them worked together, combining the Zythians' methodical approach with Jake's innovative thinking. It was challenging at first. They had very different communication styles and ways of processing information, but gradually they learned to understand each other. "Humans rely heavily on intuition," Velthar observed during one planning session. "You see patterns and make leaps of logic that seem illogical to me." "And Zythians are incredibly thorough," Jake replied. "You consider every detail and never miss potential dangers. We balance each other out." The new curriculum took shape over 6 weeks. It included traditional protocols for equipment maintenance, resource rationing, and emergency procedures. But it also included modules on adaptive problem solving, local resource identification, and processing techniques from various species. Kreesan was one of the first students to volunteer for the new program. The Veldran's natural curiosity made him an ideal test subject. "I want to learn to see possibilities like humans do," Kreesan said. "My species is good at following trails and tracking prey. But we never learn to make something inedible become edible. That is a valuable skill." Jake found that he enjoyed teaching. He discovered that explaining techniques to aliens forced him to think more carefully about why humans did things certain ways. He could not just say, "This is how we've always done it." He had to explain the reasoning, the chemistry, the logic behind each method. Meanwhile, the research team began publishing their findings. The first report reviewed 20 planets classified as barren. Using human evaluation methods, they determined that 12 of those planets actually had exploitable food sources. The resources required processing, sometimes extensive processing, but they existed. The report caused controversy throughout the scientific community. 2 years had passed since Jake Morrison found 47 food sources on Karmesh 4. In that time, the galaxy had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. What had started as one human survival test had grown into something much larger. Jake stood on the observation deck of the academy, looking out at the stars as he often did when he needed to think. Behind him, the facility buzzed with activity. Students from 20 different species moved through the corridors. New research labs had been built. Additional instructors had been hired. The academy had doubled in size to handle the increased demand for training. Still hiding up here? Amy's voice came from behind him. Jake turned and smiled. His friend had changed too. She wore the uniform of a full commander now, with medals and insignia showing her new rank and responsibilities. But her smile was the same. Just thinking, Jake said, trying to process everything that's happened. It's been crazy, Amy agreed, coming to stand beside him. Did you see the latest report from the Exploration Division? I saw part of it. Something about new colony sites? 17 planets that were previously classified as uninhabitable are now approved for colonization. All because we learned to look at local resources differently. That's thousands of potential homes for people, Jake. Thousands. Jake felt a mix of pride and discomfort. He was glad his actions had helped, but he still struggled with being seen as some kind of revolutionary. He had just wanted to pass a test. How's the integration project going? Jake asked, changing the subject slightly. Amy worked on what was officially called the Cross-Species Survival Knowledge Integration Project. Unofficially, everyone called it the recipe book because it was basically a galaxy-wide cookbook for survival. Good, actually, Amy said. We just finished documenting fermentation techniques from 87 different human cultures. Turns out that almost every civilization on Earth independently discovered that letting food rot in controlled ways makes it safer and more nutritious. The xenobiologists are fascinated. Any other species use fermentation? A few, but not as extensively as humans. The Kelthrans do something similar with a type of sea plant on their homeworld, and the Drexians have a form of bacterial processing that's close. But humans really perfected it. Kimchi, sauerkraut, cheese, yogurt, beer, wine, miso tempeh, the list goes on. We've been deliberately rotting food for 10,000 years. Jake laughed. When you put it that way, we sound kinda gross. Gross but effective, Amy said. That's basically humanity in a nutshell. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a transport ship dock with the academy. It was carrying new students for the upcoming semester. Speaking of effective, Amy said, I heard your class has a waiting list now, 3 semesters deep. Velthar's the real draw, Jake said modestly. Students want to learn from him. I'm just the weird human who eats things. Don't sell yourself short. You're co-teaching with a legendary instructor. That means something. It did mean something, Jake had to admit. His partnership with Velthar had become famous throughout the galaxy. The old Zethian instructor and the young human survivor, combining ancient wisdom with new perspectives. They had even published a training manual together that was now standard reading in survival programs across 12 systems. How is Velthar doing? Amy asked. I heard he's planning a field trip. He's excited about it in his own way, Jake said. We're taking a class to 3 different planets next month. One is standard protocol training on a Class 6 world. One is adaptive training on a Class 8. And one is a completely new planet that hasn't been classified yet. That last one sounds dangerous. That's the point. Students need to learn how to evaluate unknown environments. Can't rely on the database if the planet isn't in the database. The council approved that? Took some convincing, but yes. Velthar argued that controlled exposure to uncertainty is better than sending students into the field unprepared. They agreed. The door to the observation deck opened and Creason walked in. The Veldrin had graduated from the program a year ago, but had stayed on as a teaching assistant. His blue fur had darkened slightly, a sign of maturity in his species. Instructor Morrison, Instructor Velthar requests your presence in the classroom, Creason said formally. Then he relaxed and added, also, he's trying to set up the new holographic projector and getting frustrated. You know how he is with technology, Jake grinned. For all his experience and wisdom, Velthar struggled with modern gadgets. I'll be right there. I'll walk with you, Amy said. I want to see this new projector anyway. The 3 of them made their way through the academy corridors. The walls displayed screens showing images from different worlds, achievements of recent graduates and upcoming events. One screen showed a photo of Jake and Velthar receiving an award from the Galactic Science Council. Jake still felt weird seeing his own face on promotional materials. They found Velthar in one of the advanced training rooms, all 4 of his arms gesturing at a stubborn piece of equipment. The holographic projector was supposed to display 3-dimensional environments for virtual survival training, but it was currently showing nothing but static. I do not understand, Velthar muttered. The specifications say it should be simple. Press button, get hologram. Why is human technology so complicated? It's not human technology, it's Drexian, Jake pointed out, examining the control panel. And you forgot to turn on the neural link synchronization. That is not in the manual. Page 47, second paragraph. Velthar's eyes narrowed, which Jake had learned meant the Zethian was embarrassed but would never admit it. Perhaps the manual needs revision. Jake activated the correct setting and suddenly the room transformed. They were standing in what looked like a frozen tundra, with ice and snow surrounding them. It was not real, just light and programmed environmental data, but it looked convincing. Excellent, Velthar said, his irritation forgotten. This will be valuable for training. Students can experience extreme environments without actual risk. Though nothing beats real field experience, Jake added. Agreed. This is supplement, not replacement. Amy looked around at the virtual tundra, impressed. This is amazing. You can really train people with this? Watch, Jake said. He spoke a command and the hologram changed. Now they were in a dense jungle with thick vegetation and the sound of strange animals. We can program any environment. Students practice identifying resources, building shelters, dealing with weather. Then we take them to real planets to apply what they learned. The best of both worlds, Amy said. Safe practice and real experience. That is the philosophy of our program, Velthar said. Learn protocols in safety. Apply creativity in the field. Return alive to teach others. The door opened again and a group of students filed in. This was Jake's afternoon class, a mixed group of 8 students from 6 different species. They took their seats and the hologram faded back to neutral. Good afternoon, Jake said, falling naturally into his teaching voice. Today we're going to discuss something that might seem simple but is actually quite complex. Water. One student, a young Drakim whose crystal body refracted light in rainbow patterns, raised a hand. We already learned about water purification in basic training. You learned about mechanical purification and chemical treatment, Jake agreed. Today we're going to learn about natural purification methods. Things you can do without technology. Velthar took over seamlessly. On many worlds, your water recycler will function perfectly. But equipment fails. Batteries die. Chemical treatments run out. You must know alternatives. For the next 2 hours, they taught students about sand filtration, solar distillation, plant-based purification, and how to identify natural water sources. Jake demonstrated techniques while Velthar explained the science behind them. The students asked questions and practiced the methods using the holographic environments. This was what Jake loved most about teaching. Watching students from completely different backgrounds learn to work together and adapt. The Drakim student learned that their crystalline structure could focus sunlight to heat water for distillation. A Veldran student discovered their sensitive nose could detect water sources underground. Everyone brought something unique to the table. After class, one student stayed behind. She was a human woman named Kate Sullivan, one of only 3 humans currently enrolled. She looked nervous. Can I ask you something? Kate said. Of course, Jake replied. How did you know it would work? On Karmesh 4, I mean. How did you have the confidence to try eating things when everyone said nothing was edible? Jake thought about this carefully. It was a question he had been asked many times, and he wanted to give an honest answer. I didn't know it would work, he admitted, but I knew it was worth trying. Carefully and methodically, but worth trying. Humans survived on Earth by being willing to test boundaries. We tried eating things that looked poisonous. We tested different ways of cooking and processing. Sometimes people got sick. Sometimes they died. But the knowledge accumulated, and eventually we learned to eat almost anything. That sounds terrifying, Kate said. It was, probably, but it was also necessary. Earth didn't give us easy options. We had to create them. And that ability, that willingness to experiment carefully, is something we can share with the galaxy.